Major funding for this program has been provided by grants from Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, and Perfect Building Maintenance, New York Community Bank, All Nation Renovation, Kilroy Architectural Windows, New York's Window Company, Greenberg Traurig, LLP. Additional funding has been provided by grants from AVR Realty Company, LLC, Briarwood Organization, Capital One Bank, C.B. Richard Ellis, Cushman & Wakefield, Dime Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Eastern Consolidated, Douglaston Development, Hal Fettner, Durst Fettner Residential, Stephen Napolitano, First American Title Insurance Company, Friedman, LLP, Gemini Real Estate Advisors, LLC, Genova, Burns and Gian Tomasi, Grubb and Ellis, Investors Savings Bank, Jack Joffa and Associates Real Estate Consultants, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, Madison Realty Capital, Markham, LLP, Marcus and Millichap Real Estate Investment Services, Margolin Weiner and Evans, LLP, Massey Knackle Realty Services, M&T Bank, Meridian Capital Group, the Moynihan Group, Newmark Knight Frank, Orphanides and Associates, Siami Development, Inc., SJP Properties, Sterling and Sterling, Inc., RAL Companies and Affiliates, LLC, Spandrel Property Services, Urban American.
In New York, there are people who are visionaries. There are people who could look at a piece of dirt or a piece of land and say, I'm going to build something or I'm going to buy. And today my guest is Scott Rechler, who's the chairman and CEO of RXR Realty, who's done this for the last 20 years and at a very young age has been truly the builder of New York. Thanks for being here today.
It's great to be here, Michael. Thanks for having me.
So you were born in Long Island, and I think you went to public school in Roslyn?
Port Washington.
Port Washington. And you graduated?
About 85 from high school. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And then what happened? How did you decide to go to Clark?
The Indiana Jones movie was out at the time, and Clark has this great building called Jonas Clark Hall that looked like the school where Indiana Jones taught. And so I remember going up there the first time, and I saw this, this great building, and it sucked me in.
Was it also because you like Freud?
Well, Freud was a big piece of Clark, but it was geography. It was, what I liked about Clark was it was a relatively small school, about 2,200 students, and it really prided itself on enabling every student to do what they wanted to do. So if you really wanted to get involved in something, it was the campus was yours to get involved in, and the professors, et cetera. And so, being sort of at that time a big fish in a small pond was compelling to me.
So now it's like 1989, and like many young guys, you say, hey, maybe I'll go to law school. I really don't know. There was a family real estate business, but there was a different question. And what happened? You go to dinner once with your parents, and you said they thought you were going to go to law school, right?
But my whole life, my mom, expected me, and I expected to go to law school. And when I was at Clark, I majored in political science and economics, and that was my plan. And I actually applied to law school. And I remember at my graduation dinner with my mom, she was saying how so proud she was I was going to go to law school, and I pulled out the $200 check that used to save your seats. And Mom, I decided I'm not going to go to law school. I'm going to go to NYU in their real estate program and get into the business. And so it took me about 2 years to get my relationship back on track with my mom. Broke her heart a little bit, but it's been great ever since.
Now, 1989, the real estate business was still pretty good. And then 1991, as one would say, the proverbial problems started.
Right.
And now at the ripe age of 24, you get involved with business, and you thought, I'm going to structure, I'm going to build, I'm going to do things. And what you really did was restructure.
Right.
The Omni, right? What happened?
Well, it was a great time to get into the business. I was just finishing grad school at NYU, and like you said, it was a real transition point for industry, almost like today, right? Where what was normal business practices in the past wasn't going to be normal business practices in the future. So all the stuff that you learned and watching my father and my uncle, grow the business through their relationships and development, that was a business model that was changing. And so by coming in when I came in and bringing a different skill set and frankly maybe a more open mind to how to do things, it really gave me a window to grow.
But people say, it's Long Island. What's in Long Island?
Right.
People live in Long Island. There's no business. There's industrial buildings there. But there's nothing there. So, Long Island, a real estate company. No one even knew what a real estate company was. It's mom and pop running a business.
No, there's no doubt. That was, my grandfather started the business, and then he built the first planned industrial park in New York City. Ultimately went out to Long Island and built the largest industrial park in Long Island, which is today still the second largest industrial park in the country. And then my father and uncle got into the business and got into the office building business. And that's really when you started to see some of the New York City firms
deciding to to go out there, because at that time nobody
exactly.
What
it was cost driven.
Right, it was cost driven. Hey, there was these 2-story buildings, maybe a 5-story building. You'd never see anything going up.
Exactly. So it was, they hit it exactly right, and they began to build fully amenitized office parks that was really trying to bridge the expectations of what corporate users had in Manhattan out in the suburban marketplace. And because Long Island was fairly, as you said, naked to that, it gave them a real opportunity to do the model type corporate office parks. And it worked. But like you said, when we went public in 94, 95.
Yeah, we're not up to that yet.
Okay,
but it's 91, and you're young, you finished graduate school, you're trying to change the structure over there, and now you have to do a workout, right?
Yeah. So in 91, my father and my uncle and my brother actually built, and my cousin, the Omni building, which was a 600,000 square foot building, which was going to be the preeminent office building on Long Island, and unfortunately finished exactly the wrong time. Had one major tenant, had a large loan to it, and it was a real battle to sort of survive through that period, almost like we've survived the last 2 years, in this environment of trying to find tenants and deal with a loan that was maturing and a challenge. And I was put in charge of working that restructuring with my uncle. And it's actually a funny story. You go through this process, and we were working, I think it was 9 or 10 different banks, finally negotiated a deal to buy the debt back at a significant discount. And we had one final meeting where all the banks were flying in for this meeting, where we were going to make our presentation to see if we could bring it together. And my uncle was coming in from Long Island, and we were going to make this presentation together, but he was going to be the point person. And on the way in, he caught laryngitis. And so he called me and said, "You're going to need to do it." And so this was sort of my first time on the big stage myself.
It was like a bar mitzvah. It was like the debut of it.
Exactly. So that was really the kickoff of it. And then we successfully achieved that. And that was really the only pressure point in my family's portfolio was that. And once that was resolved, it was really more focused on being able to see what is the growth opportunity from this point forward.
Now, the interesting thing, it's in the early 90s, and some of the major REITs were, there were difficulties. They couldn't go public. I mean, as Steve Ross said to me, he wanted to go public, and basically the underwriters said, "Hey, what are you going to do with it? We don't need another residential apartment REIT."
Right.
That was the situation. So here's the situation that really took something to solidify. You're a Long Island company. You own you're a major owner of industrial properties. You're a major owner of office buildings in Long Island. But in the same perception of the world, people say, "Do I want to put money in a REIT?"
Right.
I mean, can I go public money for Long Island? Because people in New York understand it. But how do you say to somebody in Dubuque, Iowa, buy something called Rex and Associates? Right. So what happens? Ted Bigman?
Yeah, so Ted Bigman was the banker at Credit Suisse, First Boston at the time, and we actually hired them to lead us in going public. And really what drove that was, my father and uncle had built this great business. It had a tremendous competitive advantage on Long Island. They were the local sharpshooter in that marketplace. And my brother, cousin, and I recognized that we wanted to do the same thing and expand not only on Long Island, but also throughout the New York tri-state area and access public capital to fund that expansion. So we met with Ted, who had never really done this before. They sold us on Credit Suisse's, great commitment to get into this business. They'll put all their resources to it. They'll make sure it's a success. At the time, Merrill Lynch was really the main bank that was making these REIT IPOs successful. But we decided to go with Ted. And I literally learned about REITs alongside of Ted, because he really and I were educating ourselves about it. And then by the time we were ready to go public and got everything going, the REIT business at CSF of Boston closed down. Ted went to Morgan Stanley. And here we are in 2004. We've got all of our partners wrapped up, all of our banks wrapped up to go public. And there wasn't a public market and we didn't have a bank. So I called Richard Saltzman, who was
This
gracious.
is 1994.
94. I said
2004.
I'm sorry, 1994. I apologize. 1994. Called Richard Saltzman, who was gracious enough to take a meeting and brought in a banker named Andy Jonas, who now runs real estate at Goldman Sachs. And they came out, saw our operation, and said, "Okay, we'll take it public."
And then they said, "Hey, kid, you and your uncle go out and start on the road show."
Right, exactly. Well, and you know, the business plan was to grow in the tri-state area. And I remember sitting through the first practice roadshow where you put up the slides, and we had the slide of the New York tri-state area and this 50-mile radius around Manhattan and the demographics. And the first slide that comes up is just Long Island. And I turned to the banker and said, "Where is the slide?" They said, "Listen, no one's going to believe that you can expand off of Long Island. You're selling Long Island." And so, you know, my uncle and I went out on this roadshow. I guess I was 25 at the time. And, you know, we had two things to sell. We had to sell that what is Long Island. You know, a lot of people thought Long Island, they thought bar mitzvah. They didn't understand the underlying fundamentals of that marketplace, the fact that there's 3 million people, the highly educated workforce, the affluent population that lives there, the proximity to New York City. And so we really had to convince them that there was a marketplace that was deep and worth investing in and that we were positioned to be successful. And then the second thing is obviously my age was a big factor at the time as well.
So you finally raised the capital, which gives you access to the public market, gives you access to grow, and you start growing. Your first acquisition is in Westchester.
Right. So we made a couple small ones on Long Island, and then we did an acquisition of the Halpern companies. John Halpern's was a 4th-generation real estate company. Bought that company I guess it was, we signed a contract in '95, almost right around now. And then integrated that company into our company. And then we did a similar thing into Connecticut, bought the
Went to FD Rich portfolio. And then you said, hey, we're going to go out to New Jersey. You felt, hey, you know, Long Island, I can go to New Jersey.
Exactly,
and,
exactly.
And then you sent your brother out there, right?
Right, so with FD Rich, FD Rich actually still works for us today. Rick Rich still works for us today. And John Halpern's team, we have people that were there from the beginning with us as well. And then in New Jersey, we bought a company, but the owner of the company was retiring. So we took my younger brother and relocated him and his family to New Jersey. At first he thought it was a punishment, but in retrospect, it turned out to be a great thing for him and his family.
It's 1997, and you say, hey, it's time to come into the Apple. And you see in the Apple this entity called Tower REIT, owned by the Feldmans. That really was a nightmare, which basically, as everyone said, you engineered this. You were the man who put together this deal. So let's talk about the Tower deal.
Right, so you know, coming to Manhattan was a challenge for us because different than the suburbs where we bought existing businesses, when we met with the owners in Manhattan that may have needed the capital, that may have wanted to find a way to be public, it was clear to us that if we bought their business, their personalities were going to consume our business. Where we've been very disciplined about buying companies, integrating them in, and maintaining our values, maintaining our strategy, and really maintaining the brand of Rexon at the time. Impossible with the characters of Manhattan. You've interviewed most of them, so you know what those personalities are like. And it was a great experience meeting with them all, but that wasn't going to work. So we needed to find something that was messy, that didn't have social issues, that gave us a presence. And the thing with Tower was that they lost the board, which there was some members from Morgan Stanley and other institutional board members on that board lost confidence in the management team. And because it was a public company, we felt that we were uniquely equipped to be the buyer of that because we understood the nuances of navigating the public side of that acquisition. The other thing that was challenging was it wasn't all Manhattan. It was 65% Manhattan, and then there was assets in Florida and Arizona. So for us, buying that was going to be the gamble then to shed the non-New York assets. So we stepped in. We ended up buying it for about $1 billion at the time. Of course, we hit the Russian bond crisis in '98, right around there, that we had to deal with, but ultimately closed and shed our the Florida assets, shed the Arizona assets, and
you even shed the B office buildings.
The Class B assets to SL Green at the time. We shed that.
So then what happens is you decide that you have a core of maybe 3 or 4 properties from the Tower in Manhattan,
Exactly.
and you decide that you want to buy more, and you go to 919 3rd Avenue.
Right.
1185 Avenue of the Americas.
Correct, 1330 Avenue.
And 1350
1350 Avenue of the
Americas. Okay,
Getting ahead of myself
we'll get
here.
to 1330. And so you buy that, and things are growing. And there was that great Fortune article saying, which I had mentioned to you, one of the traders, one of the investment traders at Fortune said, Rexon can do anything. They could take this piece of dirt, they can mold it, and they can rent it. And that's what you were doing. So what happens over here? We were talking that, timing is everything. And I think you learn from when you first experience, with the Omni,
Right.
Never fall in love with an asset.
Right.
And I think you said to me it really related to you were going to buy an office building in Manhattan, maybe 1221.
It was the 1285.
1285 Avenue of the Americas, and you really liked it, and you couldn't believe what somebody wanted to pay. You were ready to buy it.
But it's 1211. I'm sorry, yeah, 1211.
1211 Avenue of the Americas. You were ready to buy it, and some German investors were ready to buy it, and then somebody paid an enormous price, and you said, it's time for us. The bubble is going to break.
Right.
And then you decide to go to the auction, right? You say, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to sell the business.
Right. So it was June 2006. And so we were very acquisitive from 03 through 05. Even 05, I think we did about $1.5 billion of investing in 2005. And we thought we'd go into 2006 on that pace. But very quickly, you saw the valuation really take in a sense of speculation rather than being able to sort of underwrite a sense of fundamental numbers that you can believe in. You had to really forecast rents going up 10, 15, 20% to justify what you were
Mike
buying.
Mike Fascitelli tells a great story about this. He said he's once in a meeting with him and David Greenbaum, and the analyst says, the rent, based on what my projection is, going to be $250 in 7 years. He said, there's no way we can buy this building. It's crazy.
Right, exactly. And that's really what it came down to. And on our board were guys like Lou Ranieri, Doug Crocker, this gentleman named Mickey Steinberg, who used to work for Portman, and so real people have seen the cycles. And I remember after that situation in June of 06, going to him and saying, this is it's crazy. I think it's better for us to be a seller than a buyer. And it's unique in time where you could actually sell a company of the scale of our company in a short time frame. And if you want to have multiple bidders that were willing to pay all cash. And over our history, we've always been big believers that you need to sell assets. Even as a public company, we would do what we call capital recycling. We sold $2.5 billion of assets and took the money and bought assets where we thought we can create more value along the way. So when we
Right, you were trying to increase the value of the stockholders' interest.
we were trying to increase the value of our business, and as you said, it was always about growing the bottom line. So when you sort of tapped out and you couldn't grow the bottom line anymore, it was time to recycle and move on along the way.
But wasn't that interesting? You were telling me about your son and the bar mitzvah, because you said to him, I'm going to sell the business, and what he said to your dad.
Yeah, so it was right around when we were about to begin the auction, and we had briefed the board. My CFO came over, and there was a good friend of mine and partner that said, Scott, before we take this jump here, just be sure you're so identified to this business. This is something you want to do. And I remember sitting in my backyard in June, and we thought just two of us were talking. And then he left, and I was barbecuing, and my son came up to me and said, Dad, I heard what you and Mike had to say. I can't believe that you would think to be selling Rexon. You must be crazy. And I'm trying to explain to him that, this is the right thing to do. It's the right time. Don't worry. Rexon isn't me. It's important to do it for our shareholders, for our family, and it's the right thing to do. But he didn't get it. And then when things got a little bit turbulent during the process, he kept saying to me, Dad, I told you should never have tried to sell Rexon. So
it's interesting. It's January of 2007, the right time. You get the price for you, the family, the shareholders, and everything, and then you buy back immediately some of the buildings.
Right. So what we, in doing this, the thought process was, as you had said, people don't understand the suburban markets very well. And so in terms of the natural buyers of Rexon, there were natural buyers for a lot of the central business district New York City assets, which is about 70% of our value. But there weren't as many natural buyers for our suburban projects and our development projects.
And what's very interesting, one of the buildings that you had bought when you owned Rexon was you bought, as I call it, the Jolly Green Giant in Long Island City, the Citibank headquarters.
Correct.
And at that time, Citibank was still a very strong company. It was the iconic property in Long Island City, and that was another property.
No, that's exactly. So in that one actually, though, because of the city lease, was able to demand a very high price to the buyer. So what we did is we stepped in and offered a backup bid to the other bidders that were looking and said, if you just wanted to buy the CBD, we would take these suburban properties. And Goldman Sachs and Citi that ran the process went out and tried to ensure that we were paying the highest price. And so we closed on that simultaneously when SL Green bought our company. So they bought it for $6.5 billion. We bought about $2 billion of assets back. And then we sold and syndicated out a lot of those assets.
And that's when you created RXR Realty.
That's when we created RXR Realty.
So now RXR continued to build. I mean, as you were saying to me before, you know, like development, the Princeton story is a great story.
Yeah.
In 2000, you decide to build, and then
right. So you know the concept, and maybe you'll take one step back, as I've mentioned to you before. I remember when I first came to the business, my dad gave me a book, which was the biography of Bill Zeckendorf, and it really was probably the most meaningful thing to be reading during that time period, because you read this book about this visionary developer who had built some of the greatest developments around the country. But there's a common theme to almost every story, which is that by the time he finished it, he didn't own it anymore. And what you realize is to be successful in real estate, you need to not only be great at the real estate acumen, but you need to be really good at the balance sheet management. And you know, timing is critical. You need to have staying power if you're going to be successful. And so, you know, that's particularly true in development, where you got to ride through cycles. And I always tell people when they talk about the development business, you know, this story where we just, this Princeton project, which we began in 2001, a great building on University Drive and Route 1, and University Square was called. And it's 300,000 square feet. 9/11 happens. We had already poured the concrete, had the steel, and had the granite, and decided, you know what, we're not going to go forward. We stored all that in a warehouse down south someplace. And then 2006 rolls around, the market feels better. We said, let's bring it back up. We start building, got a lot of tenant interest. Of course, we finish it 2008. All those tenants disappear. And we sat vacant with the building for the next 2 years until the beginning of 2010, where we were fortunate enough to begin leasing to BlackRock, Marsh, Atsuka, Axis, and got the building 100% leased this year, and recapitalized it, bought the debt back at a discount, and ended up doing okay. But there was a lot of agita along the way there.
Right, but you know, talking about buying debt at a discount and other situations, one of the major acquisitions that you really did was the CLK in Long Island. I mean, yeah. you are the major entity in Long Island, and you even bought that.
Right. Yeah, we're big believers right now that the best thing that you can focus on in terms of the best entry points to some of these types of opportunities is buying the debt. And again, because of our ability to underwrite the real estate and underwrite the underlying business plan execution there, as well as how we can go and financially engineer the purchase of the debt, get through the foreclosure process if necessary, the deed in lieu process, renegotiate with the other lenders. I think we're sort of uniquely equipped to be effective at that.
Prior to the show, we were talking that for the last 2 years, you've been on the road a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, not domestically, you've been traveling around the world, meeting with investors to raise money.
Right.
So what do you see these investors' interests? What do they like about the tri-state region?
Well, I think two things. One, they are big believers in New York. Globally, New York's a global city. People believe in New York. And if you look historically, and we've had this discussion before, New York, when it goes through a cycle, when it comes down, it always comes back higher, right? So people realize that when you're in a down cycle in New York, both rents and values tend to, at the next end of the cycle, peak at a higher level than where they were at the last peak. And so there's a lot of liquidity. So you have a big demand for New York. And it's really, if you listen to the investors that invest with us, it's New York and London is what we're really competing against. People are talking about either investing in New York, London, maybe Washington, but really those are the two cities that they focused on, the non-domestic investors. The second thing I think that's really important is a lot of these investors had historically been burnt by investing in asset allocators, fund managers that really weren't the hands-on people creating the value. And they've shifted their strategies to want to invest with the operators. So they're investing directly with the people that are creating the value.
When they were investing with the fund manager would go out and hire you.
Exactly.
So it was like a three-party, a tri-party situation, as opposed to here they can deal directly with the management and the guys who have the hands-on interest.
That's exactly right. And what we did when we sold our company, we kept, in the reconstituting of RXR, we had 300 employees. We sized it down to about 150. And today we're maybe about 170, but we kept all of our major disciplines, our leasing, our property management, construction, all of our public reporting capabilities, And that's a big advantage when people walk through our shop. It's not 3 or 4 guys sitting around a shop. There's an entire organization here that's done this before.
Right, with the reporting, and you can keep that. But I think another interesting thing about RXR is the relationship you have with the tenants and the relationship that you have with the brokers.
Right.
That they want to do business with you, because the biggest problem that happens in this cycle is the undercapitalized owner,
Right.
who paid, put no money in the deal. And I remember doing a symposium or something, and somebody says, "Hey, I don't have money for leasehold improvements. I don't." And, the broker is saying, "Hey, I'll bring you a tenant, but I want to get paid a commission."
Right.
And that's the nicest thing that people do say about RXR, that you always pay. You're there, and your tenants love you, and it's really a nice thing. So it's 2010, and you decide to come back into New York City.
Right.
340 Madison.
Right. So we had actually been looking at New York City for some time and thinking about that. That's really where we wanted to focus. And we actually bought some debt back in 2009 on 1166 Avenue of the Americas, and had been sourcing a couple other pieces of debt that we've been investing in the city. We've been tracking 340 Madison for some time because D. Shaw, who owns 49%, is a big investor in some of our projects. And so we felt that was one where there'd be an opportunity at some point. They were a natural seller, and we were a natural buyer, and we had the relationship. And what I've learned in New York is that to be successful, it's such a competitive marketplace that some deals have your fingerprints on them. And I always say to our guys, when you're looking at a deal and you start seeing you got your fingerprints on it, you got the relationship, someone else is busy doing something else, you got the cost of capital advantage, you understand the nuances of the tenants in the building. The more you have your fingerprints, you just grab on and you bring it home. And then the deals that you don't have your fingerprints on, move away quickly, because you shouldn't be wasting your time. You should be going to find the deals where you get your fingerprints on. And 340 Madison was one of the ones that we had our fingerprints on.
So now your fingerprints are on 340 Madison, and now you just said, "Hey, I like 1350 Avenue of the Americas. Maybe I'll go a block away." And so now you're in contract to buy 1330.
Right. Well, 1330, was a building that we eyed from 2009 when Otera foreclosed on it from Maclo, and something that we at the time were trying to get Otera to sell us a piece of that of their debt to go forward. They were smart. They held on to it, and I think they got a much better recovery because of that. So it was something that we understood. We were following. As soon as it came in the market, I called the brokers and said, "This is one that we want, and we're going to go after aggressively."
With a minute left, you have two children, a son,
and a daughter, 17-year-old daughter, and
right.
a 13-year-old son.
And do you think they'll come into the business?
So far, I keep telling them no. I'm sort of a view of go do what you want to do in life, make it on your own, and they'll be successful. And I'm trying to build our business that it's really institutional in nature. And I promised my wife, 2017, I'm taking a step back and decide what I want to do in life. So.
I think you've done a lot in your life, and I'm really happy that you're here today.
I appreciate the time. It was great catching up.
Major funding for this program has been provided by grants from Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, and Perfect Building Maintenance, New York Community Bank, All Nation Renovation, Kilroy Architectural Windows, New York's Window Company, Greenberg Traurig, LLP. Additional funding has been provided by grants from AVR Realty Company, LLC, Briarwood Organization, Capital One Bank, C.B. Richard Ellis, Cushman & Wakefield, Dime Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Eastern Consolidated, Douglaston Development, Hal Fettner, Durst Fettner Residential, Stephen Napolitano, First American Title Insurance Company, Friedman, LLP, Gemini Real Estate Advisors, LLC, Genova, Burns and Gian Tomasi, Grubb and Ellis, Investors Savings Bank, Jack Joffa and Associates Real Estate Consultants, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, Madison Realty Capital, Markham, LLP, Marcus and Millichap Real Estate Investment Services, Margolin Weiner and Evans, LLP, Massey Knackle Realty Services, M&T Bank, Meridian Capital Group, the Moynihan Group, Newmark Knight Frank, Orphanides and Associates, Siami Development, Inc., SJP Properties, Sterling and Sterling, Inc., RAL Companies and Affiliates, LLC, Spandrel Property Services, Urban American.